The short answer is not yet. There are some companies who are taking climate change risk very seriously, where their company is physically affected by the threat of climate change, particularly in the agricultural or insurance sectors. But there are a number of companies where climate change is a foreseeable and material risk to their businesses, and they're really not doing enough as yet. They're not assessing that risk and they're not taking measures to prevent that risk. I think it's really necessary to do a risk mapping exercise to understand the threat that climate change poses to your particular business and the materiality of those risks. It's not just a physical risk. There are also risks associated with the introduction of new policies. There are liability risks to a company that fails to make efforts to mitigate climate change risks. And there are risks to directors and officers who are responsible for managing climate change risks and putting in place measures to prevent it. Investors and shareholders are becoming more demanding in terms of the requirements that they're demanding boards meet on accountability in the area of climate change. Just last year in Australia, we saw the world's first shareholder class action relating to financial reporting of climate change risk. What boards can do is look very carefully at their obligations in the Corporations Act and think about how climate change risk assessment needs to feed into those disclosure obligations, particularly in the operating and financial reporting as part of the annual report. Boards may also find it useful to draw on recommendations made by the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, headed up by Michael Bloomberg. It's a very good framework for companies to think about these issues. Yes, just in March this year, the government released its response to the Senate Economics Reference Committee report on climate risk, and it did identify that there's no further legal reform required, that the Corporations Act is a principles-based approach, and so companies do have the flexibility to already implement the recommendations of the task force. And we're seeing that the task force, the recommendations really do provide the level of disclosure that a variety of stakeholders are calling for, be it investors, insurers, lenders, and the community. So it's a very useful framework to draw on.